In an era when fear overwhelmed the hearts of men, even warriors quaked. At the sight of just one giant, a young shepherd boy charged into history, not with a sword, but with faith. This is a story of David and Goliath. But this is also a story of what happens when courage meets faith and faith meets God. The valley of Elah was filled with suspense. On one side, the armies of Israel, their armor glistening in the sunlight, stood with fear, heavy hearts. On the other side, the Philistines, stern, fierce, and cruel warriors. And, at the front, risked Goliath of Gath. Over 9 feet tall, wrapped in bronze armor, head to toe, even his shadow was enough to send shivers. Every morning, Goliath would walk a step forward and shout, "Pick a man to fight me. If he beats me, we will be your slaves. If I shall be victorious, you will be our slaves." His voice reverberated throughout the valley, day after day. For 40 days, this humiliation went on, and still, none would budge against Goliath. Even King Saul, who had once been a warrior, and now was trembling with fright, watched from his tent. But far away, in the hills of Bethlehem, a shepherd was taking care of his father's sheep. His name was David. He was not a soldier. He was not tall or strong or trained for war. But he had something no army could give him, a faith in the living God that could not be shaken. When lions or bears showed up to steal his father's sheep, he did not run. He went after them. With his bare hands, with his sling, and with a belief that the Lord was with him. While his brothers were learning the art of war, David was learning how to trust. One day David's father, Jesse, called him, "Take this bread to your brothers at the battlefield." Then he said, "Find out how they are." David obeyed. Little did he know that becoming a boy, ushering bread to the battleground, would lead him into one of the most dramatic moments of his life. When David reached the camp, he was struck with terror everywhere, men whispering among themselves, faces turned pale. And then, David heard him. The giant's booming voice echoed across the valley, taunting the God of Israel. Something inside David was on fire. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine," he asked, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David's brothers laughed at him. "Go home, David, you're just a boy." But David's eyes didn't waver. He wasn't looking at the size of Goliath. He was recognizing the strength of God. Word got back to King Saul that a shepherd boy wanted to fight the giant. Saul could hardly believe it. "You cannot go up against him," he said. "You're just a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." But David said, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear. The Lord who rescued me will rescue me from him." There was no hesitation in David's voice, only conviction. Saul attempted to give David his armor, his sword, and his helmet, but when David tried them on, he could hardly move. He shook his head and said, "I cannot go with these. I am not used to them." He removed them, grasped the staff in his hand, and selected 5 smooth stones from the brook. A handful of stones and one faith capable of moving mountains. As David took the walk down to the valley, the crowd fell silent. The Philistines laughed. The Israelites held their breath, and Goliath shouted, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" His armor gleamed like fire, while his spear weighed more than most men. He cursed David in the names of his gods. Yet David never flinched. He gazed up and remarked, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Then silence. The earth shook when Goliath advanced. The giant raised up his spear, prepared to crush the boy where he was. But David ran, not away toward him, faster than anyone anticipated. He reached into his pouch, took out a stone, placed it into his sling, and let it rip. The sound of that stone slicing through the air broke the silence of the valley, and then, impact. The stone hit Goliath's forehead, and the giant collapsed. Face down, the earth shook with the massive man's fall. The impossible had taken place. The boy had bested the warrior. The weak had defeated the strong. Not by sword, not by armor, but by faith. David stood over Goliath, seized the giant's sword, and lifted it high. The Philistines ran away in fear, and Israel roared in triumph. On that day, a shepherd became a hero, and God's power was made evident for all to see. However, the narrative doesn't conclude with Goliath's defeat. This story isn't really about giants of flesh and blood. It's about the giants you face every day: fear, doubt, failure, addiction, loneliness. The giants that whisper to you, "You cannot." The giants that tower over your hope, causing you to forget who you are. David's victory reminds us that giants fall, not because we are strong, but because we believe God is stronger. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite our fears. David did not see a giant. He saw an opportunity for God's glory. David did not rely on weapons. He relied on a relationship. That's the secret of true victory, not fighting for God's approval, but fighting from a position of assurance that He walks with us. And sometimes, faith looks foolish. To the world, David looked crazy, a boy against a warrior. But in the eyes of God, that's the exact kind of faith that stops the world. Because the Lord delights in using the small to shame the mighty. He uses the ordinary to reveal the extraordinary. So, when life is a fierce struggle, when your own Goliath stands in front of you, Be inspired by David. Remember, it's not that God calls the qualified, but that God will qualify the called. And when God is with you, no giant will stand against you. Centuries later, in the same lineage as David, another shepherd would enter a battlefield, not against a giant, but against sin and death itself. His name is Jesus. And just like David, he faced the impossible. He too was mocked, underestimated, and abandoned. He too faced the impossible, but through his victory, the greatest giant of all fell and never rose again. David's stone was small. Jesus' cross was wood, but both were nevertheless enabled by the same power. The power of faith in the same living God. It's possible your struggle is feeling an awful lot bigger today. Maybe the mountain seems too high, the hurt feels too deep, and the failure seems too final. But the same God who was with David is with you today. God has not changed. He still turns shepherds into kings. He still takes down giants, and he still crafts victory stories out of impossible odds. This is not simply an age-old story, this is your story. The valley of fear you stand in today could be the very place where God reveals his glory first thing tomorrow. So, lift your eyes, pick up your stone, take steps of faith, and witness your giant fall. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that God still gives victory. And subscribe to hear more stories that awaken faith and hope, because your story isn't over. God is still writing it.